Hey, what's going on, everybody? I wanted to share some thoughts and ideas when it comes to using leverage in a portfolio. And this is not financial advice. This is just me talking out loud. I figured I'd share some ideas with you guys. And a lot of times, you guys have some great, interesting thoughts and comments in the comment section. So feel free, leave me a comment on what your thoughts are. But I watched a really good video from Covered Call ETF Investing the other day, and he was talking about using leverage in a portfolio and kind of how it works and everything like that. Well, my brokerage is also offering me a pretty large position with leverage, and I just wanted to share some of my thoughts around it. So here's a map of the S&P 500 year to date. I'm just kind of using this as an example. Of course, this isn't the fund that I would buy if I was to use my leverage, but let's say you took $100,000 in leverage, and if you took that 100 grand and you knew exactly where the bottom was, you bought here, the very bottom, man, you're doing great today, right? You're doing absolutely awesome. You could have sold it off, paid off your loan, made a bunch of money, or even if you were in a high yield fund, pay that margin down and you'd still be up, right? But the problem is, if I took $100,000 loan, here or even over here somewhere, um, you might not be in quite the same position. Now, the reason for that is every month when you get your dividends, your brokerage automatically takes those dividends and directs them towards your loan. So if you have a $100,000 loan, making $5,000 a month, that's $5,000 every single month going straight to your loan. You lose that ability to dollar cost average and buy the dips. Okay. So that's just kind of my basic thought around some risk when it comes to leverage. You lose that ability to buy those dips. Now, what does AI say about it? I asked ChatGPT to model out roughly my portfolio. This is, very rough around the edges. This is not exact, guys. And again, not financial advice. This is very, kind of a broad assumptions here with a 4% interest rate, $100,000 in margin, which now becomes a $700,000 portfolio, bringing in $7,500 a month in dividends. Now, in this situation, all the dividends go directly to the loan. And also in this situation, I need $3,000 a month to live off of. So what I do is take that 7,500, put it on the loan, and then I use a revolving door of margin to live off of that $3,000. So you can see here, net monthly reduction is 45.83 being directed to the loan because I'm using a revolving door for $3,000 to pay for bills and living expenses. Okay. And it does a little bit of math. So this type of situation would take about 25 months. Okay. That's 25 months of me paying down this loan and still being able to live through, a revolving door of margin. Okay. And then your interest costs, if that margin rate stays low at 4%, your interest costs are about $5,000 for those 2.1 years. Now, at the end, you have a $700,000 portfolio. Dividends are not being reinvested because they are being directed to that loan. Now, this situation doesn't take into consideration if any dividends were cut or increased, right? Doesn't really factor in a lot of these things, but you did pay $5,000 in interest, okay? Net cash flow benefit relative to DRIP depends on the reinvestment growth. That's what it says. Now, here's another situation. I have my $600,000 portfolio. I'm getting $6,500 a month, which is roughly what I'm at now. And let's say I'm taking that $3,000 out every month and I'm reinvesting $3,500 a month. Well, in that same time frame, I would have a portfolio value of about 692. Again, rough numbers, not taking into consideration dividend fluctuations or anything like that. Now here it compares them, okay? I've got the margin, which is 700K, and it shows you here at the end, you have 700K, and I have DRIP at 692. $0 loan balance after those 25 months. Now I've paid $5,000 in interest on that margin, but I've also withdrawn $75,000 over the course of 25 months to live off of. My net portfolio value with the margin is 695 and with DRIP is 692. Again, guys, this is very, very rough around the edges, but ChatGPT is modeling that margin would get me about $3,000 ahead, okay, with steady yields. But I'm taking on higher exposure and volatility because now I have 100,000 in margin, right? So depending on the funds you choose, depending on how the markets do, this depends on a lot of things. If your portfolio value drops more than 5% during that time, the drip would overtake it, okay? If yields or prices stay strong, margin would accelerate your net worth. So, there's going to be some extenuating circumstances here: interest rates, dividend fluctuations, market fluctuations, all of that kind of stuff. But this was really my two kind of main contentions with margin. The first one was losing the ability to buy into those dips, as you can see here. You want to dollar cost average in. That's the whole point of the dividend reinvestment, is dollar cost averaging into different funds and ETFs as time goes on. But the other thing is, how far ahead do you really get with margin? Again, it depends on a lot of factors. So obviously, the more margin you use, the more potential you have to come further ahead, right? But then the more risk you take on as things potentially fluctuate. It just really depends on your risk tolerance, I think, and which funds you're looking at buying. These were my two top contentions: is how much really farther ahead am I truly getting using margin, and am I going to be able to buy into anything if the market crashes again? I'm going to lose if I spent my 100,000 in margin and I'm kind of maxed out at where I feel my comfort level is, and then boom, things crash. Well, I don't really want to dive deeper into margin to buy a dip because now I've used more. Um, so it just depends on all those things, you guys. What your plan is. I think having a plan with conviction and exactly sticking to that could go a long ways. Coming out ahead with a few $1,000s definitely still could be worth it. It's still a few $1,000s. Maybe it's 10 grand, maybe 20, right? Depending on the situation. But modeling it out here, the results are too close. They're just too close to me. And that's kind of was one of my big questions, is losing that ability to drip versus paying down a loan, even though it's low interest. That was really my big question here, is where does things really shake out at the end, and percentages and mathematics and all that. So this is a rough situation, guys. This isn't going to be exact. None of these numbers are exact, but looking at it from this kind of it kind of confirms a few thoughts I had with the fact that I think margin and drip, you're not going to be light years ahead with margin most of the time. And if you can dollar cost average and maybe even get lucky and buy some big dips, you could even come out, the same exact way using margin, right? Like your total return could be the same. Then also, again, your comfort level. And right now, I don't have any debt. We sold our properties, so I don't have any debt to worry about. But those are just some thoughts on margin, you guys. I know it has its place. And obviously, the world runs on debt. It could be a very good strategy for some people to use if you know what you're doing and you're comfortable with it. But I think for those reasons, I'm just not quite there yet. I think I'm going to keep dripping, reinvesting as much as I can, and see where that takes me. Anyways, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a like, leave me a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.